Welcome to the Leadership Activators podcast. I'm thrilled that you're here. If we haven't met yet, my name is Carol Issa. I'm a former sound engineer turned professional coach for leaders and entrepreneurs. I truly believe that it's so important to surround yourself with resourceful minds, and it takes just one idea to create massive change in your life. With each episode, I bring you a special guest or message to help you enable the leader in you and live life on your terms. I trust that you'll enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being you. Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast Leadership Activators. It's awesome to be here. I'm thrilled. I have an amazing guest today with me, Marilyn Zakhour. Hi, Marilyn. How are you? I think you're still muted.
Hi, Carol. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So good to have you. Where are you located at the moment? You're in Dubai?
Yes, I'm currently in Dubai, where the weather is absolutely stunning, and it's a great time to be here.
Yeah, not for us here in Sydney. It's been pouring rain since morning, which is absolutely crazy. We're in summer, still in summer. Can you imagine that?
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, it has to be ups and downs. Yes, guys, so I'm going to quickly introduce Marilyn before we get straight into the conversation. I'm thrilled to have you, Marilyn. So Marilyn is the CEO and founder of Centaurs, a company that helps leaders and organizations adapt to the new ways of work in the emerging post-pandemic world. And for executives who are looking for thinking patterns, companies permanently shifting to flexible work models, and teams adjusting to remote-friendly ways of working, Centaurs offers consulting, training, insights, and technology recommendations to enable collaboration, resilience, and innovations. Marilyn has experience in organizations of all sizes and knows how to bring the agility of small startups to big corporations. Previously, Chief Marketing Officer at Emaar and Head of Dubai Opera, Marilyn holds an executive MBA from INSEAD. She has also spent 10 years in the startup world building and running digital native companies. Wow, this is so cool. I already have so many questions racing right now. That's how we're going to go with the next 45 minutes. So
Sounds great. Thank you for the amazing introduction.
Awesome. Love it. So Marilyn, I'm really curious about Centaurs, the meaning of the business. What's that all about?
How many minutes do I have to tell you the story? Well, so essentially, as you just read out, I moved to Dubai in 2018, and I was working for a company called Emaar, where I was both the chief marketing officer for a year and the head of Dubai Opera for 6 months, up until the pandemic. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, the opera shut down, and I was let go. And it was also the time where Dubai went into lockdown. So we couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck at home. I made great food for about 2 or 3 days. And then I said, okay, I have to start a company. I'm going to go crazy. And I sat down and I tried to think about what it was that really motivated me every day in my career in the past. I wanted to listen to my own advice. You know, when I helped entrepreneurs, I would tell them, start with your purpose. Your product will come later. You'll figure it out. You might change your minds a few times. And so for me, the purpose had always been, as a manager and a leader, to bring people together, to make them collaborate, to make them create more than the sum of their parts. And so I started by thinking, okay, I want to focus on human collaboration. But of course, that was a time where everybody was, it was mayhem. People didn't know what the world was going to look like. I didn't think any HR person would pay me for collaboration. But instead, I thought about what was the biggest barrier to collaboration. And of course, it was remote work. Remote work had been around for decades, but so many of us hadn't experienced it at this scale and were really suffering through it. And so we started by supporting leaders and teams into their transition to remote work. And in comes the name. So I had to submit a name for the paperwork, sitting at my kitchen, table with my best friend and my husband and trying to brainstorm something. And it occurred to me that people were going to be wearing corporate shirts and pajama bottoms. That was like the joke at the time. Everybody was going to be like a half in the office, half at home. And that's why I thought like everybody was going to be a centaur, which is a mythical creature that is half human, half horse. And everybody was using their crazy virtual backgrounds on Zoom where their head looked like it floated in outer space. And so everybody's a cosmic centaur, and that's how we called the company. And we've evolved. Of course, we still support with remote work, but as you read out earlier, I had the sense that this would be the case, and now I can be a little bit more bullish about it, that we would never really go back to working in the same way that we did before. And so we advise companies on the relevant flexible models for them, and we help them to implement them. And that's what we do today.
So good. It's funny because yesterday I was thinking about the conversation we're going to have. I looked up centaurs, and what came up was like a mythical figure that is half horse, half human, and that usually it represents chaos. And I was thinking about what you do. I'm like, maybe she reorganizes chaotic environments or something like that. It's like, whoa, where my mind went.
Well, that's a good one. I might steal it for my next pitch.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. So I'm like, this is pretty cool because we live in a pretty uncertain world, and it looks like perhaps you're reorganizing like after this whole chaos that we've been through. I'm actually very interested to learn more about your experience around your career. What I love about your career journey is that it started at graduating as an architect, right? And then there you are. And we've been hanging out for quite some time together for a while now. And interesting that I just discovered that we're from the same area. Oh my God, right before we went live, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, going back to the question. So how is it that you found moving from one career to another, like changing career path? Because I'm not sure about you, but when I grew up in our environment, it was very much frowned upon. Like, no, you want to stick to the one thing and be faithful and loyal. Otherwise, people will not hire you. It doesn't look good on a CV. What is your experience around this? What's your thinking behind this?
Yeah, so both of us come from Lebanon, where I had a choice growing up between being like a doctor, an architect, an engineer, or a lawyer, right? Like that's pretty much it. So I did become an architect, but I think I learned early on that I didn't want to be an architect for the rest of my life. And I went on exploring. And I think the first job that I found that I took seriously was this job in a digital agency where I ended up spending the next 9 years. And it was a real struggle with my family. Like my mother didn't want to talk to me about work for like 2 years. It took her 5 years to accept that maybe I had made the right decision after all. But I think I've always been a very curious person. I think the number today is that 65% of kids today will be working in jobs that don't exist right now. And so I never really thought that I would needed to have a linear career path. I was never going to be the expert in the room. I love being a generalist and I love learning about, new worlds. Like I started in tech, then I did real estate, then I did entertainment. Now I'm doing consulting. And I think what has been kind of the common thread between all of these things is just my curiosity to want to explore and learn about how you do different things, and also just the right discipline to keep being structured in the way that you progress. And a lot of people ask me about like a very non-typical career path, like as you say, all around the world, people look at my CV and they're like,
what the hell?
what were you thinking? And I just think like there are so many common skills that you share across all of these things around leadership and management and decision making. And I spend actually quite a bit of time trying to improve those skills, the ones that are shareable. And I'll leave you with this thought. There's a book that I always talk about when I'm asked about this, which is called Range. I think the subtitle is Why Generalists Will Triumph in a Specialist World. But it really actually shows that people who are able to be multidisciplinary are better problem solvers because they're able to get inspiration from a lot of different places and able to just step outside of the the drawn lines of their industry. And I'm a firm believer in that. And I think I'm also a child of history. And if you look back at like Greek philosophers, they were not philosophers at all. They were scientists and mathematicians, and yes, also philosophers and sometimes doctors. And then we kind of hyper specialized in the post-industrial world. But I think we're going to go back to seeing a lot of generalists. So that's my prediction for today.
Wow, okay. So now you're predicting too, which is awesome. So good, especially at the beginning of the year. We tend to tune into these conversations. Virgo for 2022, Leo for that sort of thing. It's funny. From your experience, it looks like you've been going from startup world into the corporate back and forth. Like there's a very rich, beautiful blend of both worlds. And it's a bit dichotomic, especially with the way we hear about it today. Like, oh, you come from corporate. That makes sense. This is why you're blah, blah, blah. Or, you're in startup. This is why you can't do this. In corporate, we really can't do that. I love the fact that you've been through both environments and you've excelled in both. In your experience, what is it that you believe startups can learn from the corporate world that can be resourceful for them and vice versa?
Yeah, that's such a great question, actually. So one of the reasons I went to corporate was that I was very curious to understand how you scale organizations, right? And I think most startups, maybe they'll fail in the first few months, but most of them fail within the first 2 years, right? And they fail after having found their product market fit because they're not able to scale their organization in the right ways. I think entrepreneurs are beautiful creatures, but they hate systems, they hate processes, they hate putting structure in place. And they end up kind of self-destructing because they're not able to kind of, I always say they're good at the 0 to 1, but they're not always good at the 1 to 100, right? And I think that's what you learn from corporate. You learn like, how do I take this amazing product, this amazing idea, the service that we're bringing to the world, and take it to a place where I can impact the lives of more and more and more people. And sure enough, I mean, one of the reasons I went to corporate was actually when I did my executive MBA, what I realized was that so many of my colleagues were miserable. And I had, because they all came from corporate and I didn't, right? I was a bit of an outlier there. And I had a wonderful career. Like I was, I didn't have Sunday blues. I was ecstatic waking up to work on Mondays. And I was very curious about what happens and how it breaks, right? But still, I was also interested in seeing, like, how do you run a 20-year-old company that's bigger than 3,000 people? Amazon is a country at this point. I don't know, it's like 1,400,000 human beings. And so it's just, that's what I think you can learn. You can learn how to put in the right governance, the right processes, the right structure, while keeping the spirit and the core of the company in place and making sure that everybody can contribute. You also learn to give up control, right? Because when you're a 3,000 person company, as a founder or an entrepreneur, there's no way that you can see everything that's being done. You just have to set the right, tracks and let people run on them. And then I think the other way around has been spoken about a lot, but so I won't talk about agility and nimbleness and so on, because I think that's like an obvious answer. But I really believe that the spirit of startups is something that corporates can learn. What I learned when I went into corporate was why my colleagues were so miserable, right? Because you lose the sense of meaning, you don't have autonomy, and a lot of times you don't feel connected to the purpose, and you don't feel like your 10 hours of effort a day or 9 hours of effort a day are going towards something that you feel proud and committed to, which is something you always feel in a startup because you're conquering the world and changing it, right? And I think that's, in addition to learning, of course, the agility, the innovation, the ability to attract talent and tell a great story, remembering to make work purposeful, I think is something that corporates can really gain from the small companies.
Wow, I love it. Absolutely love where you're coming from. Actually, it made me think about what you specialize in right now, which I believe you've used a lot of this cross cultural word, let's put it this way, where the first word that I'm thinking about is alchemist. It's like you create this magic, right? You're like a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and boom, you create something new. What is it that you found were the top challenges that businesses, mainly established businesses, have been facing in the past couple of years that they are still actually facing now? What are the top challenges that you believe have happened with COVID kicking in?
Yeah, look, I mean, I always, we have this framework in our company, we call it the bow tie. And essentially we say that, companies are constantly trying to improve what they do on the blue side, which is the customer facing side, and on the pink side, which is the employee or organizational facing side. And I think companies have faced issues on both sides, and those that didn't address them early on might still be lingering with them. I think on the blue side, they faced, so on the customer facing side, you really needed to jump into the innovation bandwagon very, very quickly. In fact, like, crises are amazing business opportunities if you're able to survive them, right? I think the number was, when I started, this was a number that kept me very optimistic, which is that 50% of Fortune 500 companies were started in an economic downturn, right? There's no better time to invest than in a downturn. But I think, of course, human beings, they're not necessarily geared for that kind of risk taking. And so I think one fundamental mistake that a lot of companies might have done in the early days, and I think they're living with the consequences of those decisions, is trying to save and cut costs rather than try to invest in the right innovations and moving forward with whether it's developing resilience for their supply chain, figuring out the right product, just jumping on the bandwagon. I mean, we all know that we've had years of digital transformation condensed into one. And if you missed that boat, then you must be kicking yourself, right? And it's not too late. That's the other thing I always say, like, on that side, human beings have a weird perception of time. I think we're not very good at understanding time. And it's only been 2 years. There are still a lot of new problems that were created by the pandemic that still deserve to be addressed and will be a great business opportunity. So don't think like it's like the stock market. You think you want to buy something, the price goes up, and they're like, okay, oh, I missed that. And then the price goes up again,
Whoops, missed it again.
Yes. So I think that's on that customer facing side. I think on the, internal organizational side, to me, the pandemic gave us a beautiful opportunity to make work human again, right? So again, I said earlier, I'm a child of history, so I love just understanding why we work the way that we work. And up until about, 400 years ago, we all worked remotely, quote unquote, in our communities, right? We all worked where we lived, where we grew, where our families were. And then because of the Industrial Revolution and the need to access the machines, the factory floor, we all had to migrate to new places to be close to the machine. And we've kind of maintained, of course, there's been a lot of management theory in the middle, but just to make it a little bit like caricature, like we maintain that way of working, like where we all have to be together. And the consequence of that is that we don't have community anymore. Like, look at you and me, we're miles and miles away from where we would have been or where we would have grown up a few hundred years ago. We would have stayed there. We would have had access to loved ones and community. And I think the pandemic further exacerbated this because we couldn't even travel back to see our families. And that's been the case for so many people. Or even if we were in the same city, we were locked into apartments and couldn't see, people we love for a while. And I think that creates a burden on companies to be the ones that form that community. And I do firmly believe that it's part of their role. And also that they can stop, just continuing to like do the things the way they used to. I think it's created a really great blank slate. And another mistake that companies will make is ignore the blank slate, is just say, oh no, we're just waiting for the pandemic to go away so that we can just go back to things the way things were. There will be no going back to the way things are, despite what leaders want. Of course, leaders want the comfort of being together in the office. It's where they learn to be great leaders. It's how they know how to lead, through their sentient, like, physical presence. But what's going to happen, and we know this for sure, is talent doesn't want to go back. Right? Like, more than 2/3 of talent says, I want a hybrid flexible work model. I want more freedom and autonomy in my decision-making. I want more purpose in my work. We can sit and talk about the Great Resignation as a symptom of that. And so missing the blank slate and missing the opportunity to reinvent what work means and how we create a purposeful environment for our employees, I think is the mistake that they made on that side.
I hear you. Yeah, absolutely. And where my thinking is going at the moment is that although some businesses do understand the importance of using this massive shift, this massive shake, just like, I don't know, but some parents might relate to this, people who are listening to the podcast now, when we have a baby, it just shakes the whole thing up. It's like you're never a parent until you're a parent. So I know that you're expecting, which is wonderful, super excited for you. Same thing, it's like this massive chaos, and only then disruption happens and growth happens. We either embrace it or we just retract. So with what you've been seeing in the past couple of years, although companies know that they need to recreate themselves in a way or another, what are the key reasons that are stopping them from doing so? What are they waiting for?
Fear and shame.
Wow.
I think,
that's it, done.
Fundamental. I think, we could sit around and talk about like the business goals and the strategy and whether they think it fits in or not. But I think what I've seen firsthand and my experience with the companies that we support is that it's rarely that the leaders don't know what's coming, right? Like I've had a lot of leaders sit down and say like, listen, I've been in this business for like decades. I understand change when I see it, but I don't know where to start. And for a leader to say that takes courage. And that's why I say fear and shame. It takes them like not kind of letting into those feelings and saying, I have to be courageous. I have to explore the new world, and I'm going to ask for help. And like, I think there's just human beings love permanence. We don't like change. We've already been through so much. We've been through a crisis. We've been on lockdown. We've had to deal with, we're opening up, we're locking down again. We've been through so much that causing your own change just feels like too much. Coming in and saying, we're going to reinvent the way we work, it's just too hard right now. And so I think on the one hand, like that's the human reason. On the financial reason, for a lot of companies, it can be they've locked into leases. They have massive like office floors that are empty, and they can't just sit around justifying the fact that, oh, we're just going to let that one go. I think there's a lot of financial pressure to prove productivity and efficiency of how you use companies' resources, and you just don't have a choice right now. And then, of course, there are different countries dealing with return to work in different ways and imposing different types of regulations and allowing for freedom or not in the way that like even your employment contract works. Like in some countries, you can't possibly offer remote work because if your employees leave the country, then you're in fiscal trouble, right? So if they're in London anyways, what are you going to do? Like have this crazy expensive office in London and let them sit in their expensive apartment in London, and that's that. And then I also think there are some parts of the way we used to work that are worth preserving. So I don't want to come off sounding like I'm a remote work like extremist. I'm not. I think there's plenty of reasons to be together. I think we can create a lot of things when we're together. And so there are also some good reasons. And I think sometimes it's difficult to untangle them, right? To say like, okay, what are the good things we want to preserve that are worthy of a fight so that we could bring them back, quote unquote? What are the things we should be letting go? Which is why we spend a lot of time just helping leaders with being their thinking partners, giving them decision-making frameworks. I believe in the ability of leaders and middle managers and everybody to make the right decisions if they're given the right framework to make that decision. And that's the space that I try to create for them. It's not like this is the right approach to work. It's more, let's think about it. Let's talk about your culture, your company, your business goals, your purpose. Great. Now let's talk about what's the right way to bring people into work.
So there's not one way. There's the way that works for this company. I mean, yeah, the underlying challenge is fear and shame. Yes, but then it pops up in different ways for different companies. So you are there to untangle the complexity of how is it that we're going to create a solid plan that makes sense for you, that works for you, in a way that we're keeping what we love and what will work, and embracing the change and what needs to change and focus on that. Absolutely love this. You speak a lot about the intelligence of the team, or I'm actually The collective intelligence of teams. Sorry about that. So what is it? How is it that you define this and why it's important?
Yeah, so collective intelligence is kind of, if you want to put it this way, is like the way in which teams come together to share their knowledge, their skills, their capabilities in order to develop something new. You know, I've been doing a lot of research this week about innovation. And I think like a good metaphor for this can be inventors are usually solo. You know, think of like, I don't know, Da Vinci, right?
Yes.
They can just invent on the side. But innovation requires group work, because innovation isn't just about inventing something. You can be a very poor inventor, right? Like you can have genius ideas, but never truly be able to bring it to scale. And innovation is how you take that and you're able to execute it, to kind of bring it to life and to in a business context to scale it, right? To make it accessible. And the reason why collective intelligence of teams is so important is because they're able to do that. That's not to say that you can only be creative in teams. In fact, there's a lot of research to show quite the opposite, that like you probably will get your best ideas away from the team. Otherwise, in teams, you might end up like falling into consensus. Like there's a danger to both. But once your best idea has come to life, the only way to like truly give access to it and truly make it impactful, I believe, is through teams, because the diversity of the skills and knowledge is what's going to make it happen. And so, you know, if you look, an example that I always love is Google. All of the great innovations from Google, including like Gmail, you know, Google, whatever, like a bunch of their products came from like small teams inside the organization. And so that's why I believe in collective intelligence, because I think that's how you bring, you know, great innovations to the market and great innovations to your internal organization. And so we work on how to help people just build those bridges, build that connection, build the knowledge of each other. You know, there's, again, like a great research about high performing teams. And, you know, being a woman myself, I'm not going to be too shy about this result, but essentially the best performing teams have slightly more women than men. Now, that's cool. I'm a woman. I feel great about that. But if you look at the underlying reasons why that's the case, it's because women are socialized to be more collaborative, and they're socialized to be more in tune with individual needs and preferences. And so when they're in a team, they're so much better at saying like, Carole is really great at this one thing. Like I should talk to her about having her be involved in this, right? And Marilyn is amazing at this. She should handle that. And so they're able to bring out the best in the collective. And that's something that I think can create true magic for companies. And I've always been obsessed with teams. Again, like I'm not a remote work evangelist, I don't think teams are the answer to everything, but I think they're the answer to most of the innovations that we can put out there.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think with what you shared, what popped up as you were sharing this is the importance of teaching managers leadership skills in terms of facilitation. Because like you shared, there's this inductive thinking that has to happen. And the way I would define it is the masculine way of leading, masculine energy. It doesn't have to be gender specific in any way. You can still be a woman and be very masculine in your way you lead. Is very deductive, very much to the point, let's get done with it, that sort of thing. Whereas the feminine energy or the feminine way of leading is more facilitation around, let's see how we can combine the different ideas and create something that is unique to us. And I think this is a skill that is an absolutely must when it comes to training leaders, in that really bringing the best out of the team that is right here and create this unique blend of what we have here, which is very much around the inductive thinking. And I love what you shared around that. There is a third component that you also talk about. So I heard a lot of collaboration, innovation, and how this can help that. What about resilience?
Yeah. So resilience, of course, is a big theme. Resilience is the word that like comes back in you know, the tag cloud of the universe whenever there's a crisis, because companies suddenly realize that maybe they're not as resilient as they thought they would be. And resilience is about like your capacity to adapt to change, right? And those concepts are so interconnected. You know, last year I did an amazing project for a global FMCG on the topic of organizational resilience. And what's, of course, as a Lebanese, that word is very triggering to me, because, you know, we always we're always told we're very resilient because a lot of really shit things happen to us and we're able to move
Phoenix.
forward. Yeah, that's not the kind of resilience I mean, right? So let's put that on the side. But organizational resilience, if you go back to like the core of its definition, is actually about a company's ability to generate options in the face of change and then to execute on those. That's why that's so interconnected with innovation, with collaboration. I think those three concepts don't exist without one another. And if you kind of just go back to like, okay, well, how does a company become resilient? There's an amazing article actually, and maybe we can post it in the comments later, by a Diane Kutu in HBR about organizational resilience. But it's really about, first of all, reconnecting with your purpose. And it's so wonderful that like you get to have these conversations with big corporates because they sometimes have lost this along the way, right? But it's going back to why you exist, right? And then creating the space for your staff, your employees, your contributors to generate optionality, which is, let's take the example, like a lot of discussions have been had over the last years on the resilience of supply chain, right? Because of the disruption around the world. And you probably see this. I love going to the supermarket just to see what's missing, like, and try to understand like where the supply chain went wrong on this one. But we've seen that in our lives today, disruption of supply chain. And so companies used to have optimized routes, right? Like they would say, this is the cheapest way of getting this product from here to there. And that's the one we're going to invest in. And then in the last 2 years, they've had to develop a resilient system, which means they've had to develop optionality, right? So giving your staff the opportunity to say, instead of like banging your head around making this one route work, how about we make a resilient supply chain? And we try to like source from different places and get a bit more creative about how we do things. And then the next step is like putting your money where your mouth is, right? So if people come inside your organization and they come up with ways of being resilient, then you better invest in those ways, because you're not going to be resilient unless you generate the optionality. You better invest in it with your money. You better invest in it with your internal politics. A lot of times ideas get killed because some expert says no, right? Or some big leader isn't ready to like, be the sponsor of an idea. And as an organization, you can develop actually methods to counter these things. One example I love is there's a company in that article that Diane cites where she says, like, what they do every year is they go back to the entire organization and they ask them to resubmit all of the ideas that got killed. Right? And then they review them. And the reason ideas get killed isn't always good reasons, right? Sometimes it's just like fear and shame. The manager just is too afraid, isn't a risk taker, doesn't want to. Sometimes they're bad, but sometimes they just don't get the right sponsorship. So this is an example of like, you can institutionalize resilience by making the optionality something that like you seek, and then that you actually invest in and put money and power behind. And that's why those themes to me are so connected. And I can't really speak about one without somehow, stepping onto the other. But we've all just realized how important it is to be resilient. And companies that had done this before would have considered by their like boards and like CFOs as being wasteful, like, right? Like companies that would have invested in having optionality, the CFO would have tried to kill it at some point, but they were the ones who did really, really, really well in the pandemic. One example that my husband taught me about is this company called Bacca Frost. They do salmon, like nothing sexy, right? But even though the business that made them the most money was restaurants, they also had a distribution line to supermarkets. And guess what? What happened in the pandemic? It didn't make them enough. Like the margin, if you looked at the margin, you'd be like, why are you selling in this channel? It's so stupid. But without it, they would have tanked in the pandemic, right? And this is the resilience that I try to kind of teach teams and organizations about, which is keeping that optionality open, because we are in a time of crisis and you never know which option you need. And I guess that's why Lebanese are resilient, right? Like, when the electricity goes away, we have some guy who provides it to us. And when he stops, we have like a generator in the building. And we're very good at generating optionality. And in that sense, I do identify with it. And that's why that theme is so important.
I like a lot the idea. It's so good about optionality. It's great because it reminds me of one of the saying that we have in Lebanon. You close the door, they open the window. You close the window, like there is always an exit somewhere, which is so good. Exactly. Usually you look through the lens of an omni-channel organization when you are assessing what's going on for the organization and where the attention needs to go, where the focus needs to go. And what's great about it is that it's embracing both sides. The people side, which you call the pink, right? So that there were two colors,
exactly.
The bow, right?
Unfortunate choice of colors, but once we had done it, it was too late to change it.
So let's go with pink for now. And then you have the more of the money ROI driven side of the spectrum, which are the business goals and all of that. So what is the omni-channel organization strategy and how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So omni-channel is a word that comes from retail, right? Originally. And essentially it was that when kind of the internet really became mainstream and you started having social media and mobile apps and e-commerce websites and so on, retailers had to adapt to not just selling you things in their store, but also being able to engage with you across all of their channels, right? Be they customer service, e-commerce websites, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why it's called an omni-channel strategy, which is that you as a consumer, you want to have a choice over where you interact with the brands that you love, and they have to build an approach that allows you to do that and allows them to serve you no matter where you choose to interact with them. My view is that in the post-pandemic world, and I think that was already the case before, but even more so now, we have to develop organizations that are not just omni-channel for our customers, but that are also omni-channels for our employees and internal stakeholders. You know, a big consequence of the pandemic is we all know talent is going to want to be flexible or remote, but also now that we no longer feel the requirement to hire somebody next door, we might end up, actually finding amazing talent halfway around the globe. And I think also the typologies of contracts that we have, like how people want to be in a relationship with a company, is going to evolve. Maybe not everybody wants full-time employment. Maybe they want optionality. And so my view on this is that to be successful in most business strategies, especially when it comes to knowledge work, you have to build an environment that is omni-channel for your employees. And that means they need to be able to contribute value to your company from wherever, whenever they want, in the same way that your customers can interact with you that way. Why is that valuable? It's valuable because it allows you to unlock talent. It allows you to not be a victim to time and place, and to expand your scope of where you can recruit the kind of talent you can have, and absolutely like get that hard-hitting talent that's going to ask for more. And that's how we help organizations as well. We say, like, let's come and see how omni-channel you are. So we have our own assessment methodology. You can, it's like a psychometric test, but for your business, or like an engagement survey if you're familiar with the Gallup Q12 or anyone in the audience. But it's like taking a disc for your company, and essentially what we measure for is across 5 dimensions, which are people, process, structure, systems, and culture, how omni-channel they are. Like, what does it mean for a culture to be omni-channel? A lot of people, when you say, why do you want to bring people back to the office? Oh, that's where our culture is. This morning, I saw a really funny post on Instagram, like someone saying, people should come back to the office to experience the company culture. And then there was a picture of like a desk, like what do you call those? Just like one of those like a shitty, like open space desks.
Open space?
Yeah. And it's like
the separation. Yeah.
Right? Like,
what was it? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a picture of that, and there's no culture there. It just looks like a factory for humans, right? And so having a culture that's omni-channel is having a culture that does not require co-location, right? Having rituals, moments, events, ability to share your norms and behaviors that transcends having to be together in the same space. That's an example. Or having, processes that are omni-channel means people don't have to be co-located in order to get approvals, to move work forward, to ideate, to whatever, to make a decision. And then that all these ways of processing information or decisions inside a company are documented and available to all, so that no matter where they are, if I'm a new joiner and I come into a company, I can go into our shared drive or wiki or whatever it is and be like, how do I do this? And I get the answer. I don't need to be sitting next to Carole in the office and saying, hey, Carole, I'm new here. Can you help me figure this out? So our approach is to help companies assess where they are on that spectrum, and then to help them identify the key areas where they need support, and then to help them implement the change. Because none of the solutions that you need in order to become more omni-channel are like rocket science. Honestly, you could Google most of them. The difficulty, as always, is the change management. That's the part where we don't want to be called just consultants. So that's why we always say we're a consulting and implementation company, because I think it's easy to just give somebody a PowerPoint saying like, here are 5 things you need to change in your company. The hard part,
concepts as opposed to context, and how can
the hard part is doing it, right? The hard part is saying, don't worry, I'm not going to let you go until it's done. That's why we see like really wonderful success with our clients, even after we leave. We try to run the survey again 6 months later to show that it really sticks. It's not that we constantly have to be there for it to work. We've truly transformed the way that organizations are operating. And that's why it's so great to have that like before and after assessment, because you can really prove that something has changed and the needle has moved.
Yeah, love that. So something that I hear a lot is one of the biggest challenges with organizations at this stage in the last 2 years, of course, is that when they are onboarding new team members, and you've touched on this when you were sharing your answer, and I hear all the time, like they don't feel the culture, they don't feel the vibe of the office, of who we are. And it's very hard for us and challenging for us to let them get what we're about when they've been onboarded remotely, when they haven't met team members like face to face, when they haven't lived with us like in the same room. What's your thinking behind this, and what could be a few tips or food for thoughts that we can start directing those businesses towards to start solving this problem and helping the new team members feel the culture and be part of the culture?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I don't believe that for a second. Like if you just, again, it's always good. This is why I love being a generalist. Always good to look at like alternative spaces, right? Yeah. When the internet came about, and even till this day, like chat rooms, right? Like, I don't know if you were like an early, like I was a teenager on like MIRC and ICQ and whatnots, and you'd go into groups and now you continue to do that. And you do that even like in gaming communities and, where like, I don't know, the Clash of Clans of this world or whatever they are, and you form groups, and that group has a specific way of approaching problems, and they're aggressive or they're not. And they, they debate, and these people have never met each other in their lives, and yet they're able to form culture. I think like in terms of like tip, let's break down what culture looks like, right? A lot of people think like, oh, culture is like, oh, here are our values. I'm going to email them to you, and now you know them, and now you're part of our culture, right? But culture is not about like what we write down it is. It's actually the artifacts of culture. So suppose that you're, 1,000 years from now, there's an archaeologist or an anthropologist who discovers your data, right? They discover your calendar, your documentation, all of the things that you shared as a company, and they have to reconstitute your culture from that data. That's the only true way to look at culture. And so what does that mean? If I look at your calendar and I can see what rituals you have as a team, right? Like, do you come together outside of work or not? And I don't mean outside of work as in together in a restaurant or something. It could just be that you dedicate an hour once a month or whatever it is, to just not talking about work and learning about one another? Do you have rituals to celebrate when you win something? Do you have rituals to review your performance? It doesn't all have to be social rituals. But if I look at your calendar and I see that all the meetings you have are about just progressing work, then yes, of course, your people you just onboarded have no idea what the culture is, because you haven't created space for them to experience it, right? If you don't take the time to actually, let's talk about, purpose and values. Like so many companies, they write these down, they stick them on the wall in the office, and then they pray to God that everybody understands what it means, right? Like, let's hope, fingers crossed. Actually, I always tell companies, the first thing I want you to do is take your values off the wall. Because if they're just on the wall, then there's no point. That's not what values are about, right? My mother doesn't need to remind me of my values that she taught me every day, because they're deeply ingrained in my behavior, right? So if you look at things like values, if they're not implemented into not just your performance evaluations, your interview process, but your everyday, like sometimes I'll be sitting with my team and we're cracking on about like a project we're working on and we're trying to make a decision. I say, remember, curiosity is one of our values. So we have to go and find a better answer, right? It's part of it. Or someone will say something and I'll be like, I will note that they have expressed discipline, which is another one of our values. And like, I think culture is about those artifacts. Like if an anthropologist came back and found all your email exchanges, your Zoom recordings, your documentation, would they be able to reconstitute it? If yes, then you're doing a good job with your onboarding and your culture sharing. If not, then it has nothing to do with remote work. It has to do with being intentional in sharing what it means, telling the stories of the company, getting people to read things. Like we've worked with large companies that didn't even have an onboarding pack for their employees. I mean, there are basics. So you can't sit around and tell me, oh, no, we need to be back in the office together because onboarding has been a mess. If you haven't been intentional about the way that you do it, and if you haven't made time for it, like everything else, time is the only measure of value. And so to me, like, I think there's so much to be done. Just a resource that can be useful is on our website, we have a ritual bank. So cosmiccentaurs.com, and then you'll find the ritual bank in the menu. If you need inspiration about like, how do you bring people together and put intentionality in your time, I don't know, there's about 50 rituals there. There's also a worksheet for you to invent your own rituals. Like that's such a big piece of how you onboard people to culture. So I can leave you guys with the resource that can be useful.
Awesome. Love it. I love the parallel that you shared. Like if an anthropologist were to come across the company, would they get what it was all about, or they're going to have to fill in a lot of the blanks? Love that. It's such a good exercise. Absolutely love this approach. About resources, since we're there and you mentioned this resource, there is something that you mentioned to me at some point with the score, it's like a health check for the organization to see how they score across the 5 dimensions: structure, people, process, systems, and culture. Can you tell us more about it and how it can be helpful?
Yeah, so that's called the Omnichannel Organization Assessment, and it's about measuring how flexible you are across these 5 dimensions. And under each of the 5, there are 3 sub-themes. I won't bore you with them. They're all on our website. You can check them out. But essentially, we do a combination of interviews and surveys inside organizations to help quantify how flexible a company is and how much of a flexible environment it's offering its employees. And then to also tell the story behind the numbers, because oftentimes like you'll get a 2.5, but you don't know why it's a 2.5. So we combine it with interviews across the company in order to tell the story behind it. And then we come back to the leadership or the team that hired us and say, okay, like we've assessed you across these 15 dimensions. Here are the ones where you're lagging behind, and this is the kind of effort or support that we could give you in order to improve on those dimensions. So that's what the Omnichannel Organization Assessment is about.
It's awesome. So I'm just going to post right now in the comment section also for people who are listening, direct link to access it, which is great. And also for those of you who have tuned with us for the past few minutes and who are here, you might have missed the beginning. So we're going to have an exclusive 15-minute Q&A session inside the Leadership Activators Facebook group, straight after the podcast session with Marilyn. So she's been so generous to offer us more time so that we could ask her directly your questions. So if you're interested to ask Marilyn questions and would love to be part of this conversation, I would love for you to join the Leadership Activators Facebook group after the podcast, which is going to be in about 5 or 10 minutes. So back to you, Marilyn. We've spoken about leadership a lot in so many different shapes and forms, and the importance of facilitating the feminine style of leadership, where it's important, where it's come into place, more of the masculine side where it comes into place. And again, it has nothing to do with gender, it's more of a style. And also we spoke about how is it that we can lead conversations around being more inductive thinkers rather than deductive. We also spoke about the importance of leadership when we are onboarding new team members. How is it that we are emphasizing and being and living, creating rituals around our values, mission, and vision, and making sure that we are noticing that and acknowledging our team members around that, as opposed to just having them sitting on the wall, which interestingly, the remote work has surfaced this issue, like the gap becomes bigger, but it's not that remote work has created this problem. It has always been there, but it wasn't that big and emphasized. It's just that, which is a beautiful gift that remote work gave us and hybrid work to see the problem. Which is absolutely great. So in your experience, what is the definition of leadership that you have now? What does the word leadership mean to you now?
I always defer to a definition that one of my professors gave one day that just resonated so much with me. So my professor's name is Jose Santos, and he said that the true role of a leader is to absorb the uncertainty of the world in order to create a space where their teams can work in a relatively certain world to create value. And I think there has never, so I heard this definition in 2017 and it resonated with me, and boy, did it resonate with me in the pandemic, right? Which is, we're not good at creating in uncertain times. Most of us, we're just not capable of doing that. We get overwhelmed with, our fundamental, our fight or flight, our survival instinct. And a great leader is able to create that space through whatever mechanism they have. Like for some leaders, it's through their presence. For others, it's through breaking down scenarios. Like there's so many different ways of doing it. It's not one style of leadership, but it's the outcome of that style, which is you create that space where people feel safe and they feel like the uncertainty is reduced, although of course it's never gone, and they can truly just focus on what they're doing. And I think that's a really great definition of leadership, and perhaps a very feminine one. I don't know.
Feminine energy one. Yeah. It's funny that you're mentioning this. We are going live again this week and actually the tables are going to be turned, and we were discussing about the topic that we go live with, and we were talking about this, exactly that, feminine and masculine energy styles and how they play out in different environments. For some reason, I've been coming across this a lot lately. And there's this theory, I'm not sure if you've seen it already, that now the feminine energy style is starting to take over, not because it's better, to rebalance the excessive masculine energy style in the business world. So it's just created an imbalance. And now the feminine is just trying again to create this balance and is coming back. In terms of books or podcasts that you've recently come across, what is a book or a podcast that you absolutely love, that you'd recommend, and why?
Wow, that's such a great question. One of my favorite podcasts is The Knowledge Project. So it's a podcast by the guys at Farnham Street. And they call it a long form podcast in the sense, it's not Joe Rogan 3 hours and a half. Also must not pronounce Joe Rogan's name.
Oops, we're gonna be like beep beep censorship.
So it's usually about an hour long episode. They always, so Shane Parrish, who's the host and the founder of Farnham Street, interviews different kinds of thinkers, academics, business people, but has like a long and slow conversation with them about, you know, what they're thinking about and how they approach the world, what they've learned, so that you can learn from them. And I think almost every single episode, I come out like reflective about the world. And I think it's such a beautiful gift to have that time. And so that's definitely one that I would recommend if you guys haven't heard of it yet. And on the topic of feminine and masculine energy, I just wanted maybe to add, it's funny, I've also been coming across this a lot in the last 2 weeks.
Yes.
But I don't know if you know this, but after natural crises, the number of girls that are born is always higher than it normally is, right?
Whoa.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, it's part of like repopulating the earth, you know what I mean? But it's an interesting thing, like, because feminine energy, or women, or, you know, like, are the carriers of like the survival of the species. And so after crises, after wars, there's always more women born. And so maybe that also can contribute to what you've been learning around.
Oh, wow. This is
feminine
awesome.
leadership. Yeah.
I haven't seen, wow, this is so cool. Love it. Thank you for sharing this. Wow, impressive. It's amazing how Mother Nature just like, whoop, let's rebalance, whoop, let's rebalance this sort of thing. Secretly working in the background. So what is a 30-day challenge that you could throw to our listeners? A challenge that you believe will create a high impact either in their life or in their business? Because I don't believe really that this life, business, or work-life balance, to me, they're both the same. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, good. Awesome. So we come from the same space. What would be a 30-day challenge that you believe will create a high impact in their life or their career or their business?
Yeah, look, I'm a firm believer in intentionality. You know, like when I was talking about rituals, or when I was talking about building resilience, it's all about what you put your resources towards. And I think our most precious resource is time. And I think becoming a lot more mindful about how you use your time this week, measuring, like, I have a timesheet for myself. I do data entry for every hour spent. And at the end of the month, I can look back and say, did I spend it on the right thing? Is this what I told myself I'd be prioritizing? And did I lie to myself, or did I actually get it done? That would be my 30-day challenge. Do the math, put it in an Excel sheet, or use a timesheet software, or whatever it is, what it is you're spending time on. And at the end of the month, reflect back on whether you did actually spend time on the things you said you were going to prioritize, or whether you let the world take over your most precious resource. That would be the challenge. And I think as a leader, doing that will show you, did I spend enough time talking to my employees? Did I spend enough time talking to my customers? Did I spend enough time on deep work for things that have long-term effect? Or was I, dragged into the mud by the daily tasks? I think no matter what you do, whether you work or you don't, whether you're leading a team or you're a member, I think that's a really great way to become intentional about how you spend your time.
Wow, this is so good. Beautiful. It's amazing. It's funny because it took me right back into a very masculine energy book, which is the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And part of it, they talk about how is it that you are doing that is leading to the result that you're looking to achieve. And if you're not doing these tiny things that are leading to that big result, then why are you surprised with the results? And what I love about what you shared is that, yes, time is the most infinite, the most precious resource that we have at hands. And the way we spend our time is going to dictate the results that we're getting or not getting. So a time audit, to be a bit like, to make it less rigid, it can be more of a time health check. Love that. Absolutely love this. So thank you so much, Marilyn, for joining me in this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me and for your brilliant questions. You left me with a lot to think about.
You're so welcome. It was so good. So guys, for those of you who are listening and still with us, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break to go back live inside the Leadership Activators Facebook group. So take a quick break, want to get a glass of water, have a chat, send an email, whatever you need to do. And we'll meet you inside the Leadership Activators Facebook group for the exclusive Q&A session. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye for now. We'll see you on the other side.